The new Wano bounties and new emperors are here, or at least in that newspaper that Apu was holding that we did not get to see in this newest chapter. I suspect that we will likely be getting it in the next chapter, or maybe we'll have to wait after the break, but we're gonna get it very soon. But you guys wanted me to make one final prediction on these Wano bounties and who these new emperors are, so I'm here to satisfy. But I do just need one thing from you, which is to hit that subscribe button and join a King Pirates crew. Alright, but with that being said, let's get into these Wano bounties, and we'll start off with the Straw Hats. As far as the Straw Hat bounties go, I still feel pretty closely to the last prediction video I made, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. We'll start things off with Luffy, who I've predicted is going to get a 5 billion berry bounty for a pretty long time now. This is a prediction I've stuck by multiple times through multiple Wano bounty prediction videos. I've seen a lot of people say, no, that's too high, like Luffy technically did not defeat Kaido by himself. But all we have to do is just look at the history of the story. That's the beauty of One Piece being a 1,000 plus chapter story. We could just look at the previous arcs, like when Luffy defeated Doflamingo with the help of Law, or Katakuri with the help of Katakuri stabbing himself. In both of those fights, in the aftermath, you still had a lot of people saying Luffy technically wasn't stronger than either of those characters. But at the end of the day, what really matters is that Luffy came out on top with a W, so he's gonna surpass those guys. And also another point to consider, this is something Morge mentions all the time, which is bounties. The whole point of them is to create this gigantic moment of hype. So if there's one thing bounties is not gonna be, is predictable and reasonable, because that would just be boring. Like, can you imagine everybody getting hyped for Luffy's bounty and it's just like, 2 billion because, you know, he's the new Yonko and he's not quite at Blackbeard's level. That's simply not gonna happen, so I think it's definitely going to 5 billion, and honestly, I'm starting to think it might go even higher than that, because usually the character that Luffy defeats, he kind of like almost 1.5x's their bounty. Like Katakuri, for example, had a 1 billion berry, Luffy jumps to 1.5 billion. Now, obviously, with Kaido being 4.6 billion, Luffy's not jumping to like 7 billion, but I don't think it's impossible that Luffy jumps all the way to 5.6 billion, because Oda does love to go crazy with these bounties, really just like exceeding our expectations and creating a gigantic moment of hype. And then as far as the story goes, you have to consider we're entering the final saga. How many more chances is there gonna be that Luffy gets another bounty upgrade? Like, sooner or later, we're gonna take down the world government and the bounties are not really gonna matter as much. So while I'm gonna stick to my long-time prediction of 5 billion, I can totally see it going even higher. With that being said though, let's next talk about Zoro and Sanji, who I think are going to be relatively close to each other. Oda has been really building up this back and forth of those two one-upping each other as far as their bounties go, and even with their recent opponents with King and Queen, they were incredibly close in terms of bounties. King was 1.39 and Queen was 1.32 billion. So I suspect Zoro and Sanji's bounties to both go above at least 1.4 billion. Like I said, I think they'll probably be right next to each other. It could be really funny if they end up tying, but to lock in my guess, I'm gonna go with like 1.52 for Zoro and 1.51 for Sanji. But moving on to the other Straw Hats, who are usually kind of hard to guess, but this time around it's a lot easier because a lot of them had other opponents that had bounties, so we kind of have like this baseline of like what they need to surpass. And we'll start off with Jinbei, who's probably gonna have the highest bounty after the Monster Trio. Currently his bounty is only 438 million. He just defeated Who's Who had a bounty of 546 million. So I think there's a pretty simple answer here, that Jinbei is gonna get a bounty over 600 million, and Oda will probably work in some sort of wordplay in there with those numbers. Outside of the Monster Trio, the bounty jumps usually aren't as crazy unless it's like a situation of Usopp being a god and he jumps all the way to 200 million. So I don't think Jinbei needs to jump to like 800, 900 million or anything like that. So I'm gonna guess somewhere between 600 and 700 million. After Jinbei though, I gotta talk about my guy Frankie, who has been completely and utterly disrespected with his bounty, which is still under 100. It's at 94 million. The disrespect after Wano has to stop, because Frankie was easily one of the most impressive Straw Hats in terms of feats and power in Wano. Ran over Big Mom with his bike, took out a number, dusted Sasaki. He wanted all the smoke. So Frankie should be getting one of the biggest jumps in bounty, and deservingly so. The person he defeated, Sasaki, has a bounty of 472 million, so I think Frankie should be jumping over 500 million. If he gets under 500, I'm gonna be a little disappointed, because Frankie deserves better. Because genuinely, I really think Frankie was just so impressive in Wano. Like, if you think about the Straw Hats across the board and their fights, pretty much everybody that defeated a major opponent, besides Jinbei, I guess, had like a power-up. Frankie just walked into his Tobiropo fight with everything he had and just dusted Sasaki. So I'm going with a bounty of over 500 million for Frankie, because my guy deserves it. Moving on to the next person though, this is gonna be one of the hardest people to guess, and that is Robin, because I've always said her bounty is incredibly inconsistent and it makes no sense. Hats. Because right now her bounty is just a measly 130 million, but all of a sudden the world government wants to be like, oh shit, she's actually important. We have to kidnap her. Like, really? Now you just realize the only person that could read poneglyphs joining the Straw Hats was a bad idea? You didn't think about that when you raised her bounty by 1 million after the Straw Hats rescued her from Innie's lobby? I still can't get over that. I've always thought Robin's bounty was incredibly low for how important of a character she is. At the very least, after her defeating Black Maria, who had a bounty of 480 million, she should be getting a decent jump of also over 500 million. So at the very least, I'm expecting over 500 million, but the world government is starting to actually take her seriously, like for once, finally. So maybe they actually end up giving her a bounty that's much more realistic of how dangerous she is, and she might go all the way up to 1 billion. With that said, the next two people that I want to talk about are Nami and Brooke, and these two are interesting because they didn't really have any fights and proper matchups within Wano. Nami technically ended up fighting Ulti and defeating her, but that was with a lot of help. Number one from Big Mom, but also from Zeus. I guess at the end of the day, what really matters is that she defeated Ulti. She also got one of Big Mom's homies as well. So honestly, I'm fully here for Nami also getting a pretty big boost in her bounty. Ulti had a bounty of 400 million, so I can see Nami jumping to like 450. That's a pretty big jump for her because she's currently at 66 million, but we're entering the final saga. This is the Pirate King's crew. They need some high bounties. Brooke, on the other hand, is even harder to judge because he literally did not have a 1v1 matchup against anybody, so he doesn't really have a baseline to go off of, but I do think after Wano, the Straw Hats across the board are just gonna get a massive boost because of what they accomplished. So I'm gonna kind of base this off of Brooke's current bounty at 83 million, which is on the lower end, but still in that middle tier. So I'm gonna guess he jumps over 450 million as well, right above Nami, but still under Frankie. On to the next person though, we have Usopp, who I actually think is gonna get the smallest jump in bounty out of all the Straw Hats, if he even gets a jump in bounty. Because as we know, coming out of Dressrosa, Usopp had just this massively out of proportion bounty jump because he was the god of Dressrosa. So with his current bounty of 200 million, he's already kind of out of order. Before that massive bounty jump, he was only at 30 million, so one of the lowest within the Straw Hats. So not only do I believe that he's gonna kind of go back into his place, but another reason why I believe he's not gonna get a major jump is because of his character development towards Elbaf. Because one thing I've talked about as far as Usopp's role in Wano is that I've been a little disappointed that he really has not done much at all in this arc. But my current theory on this is, and maybe this is me just like coping and hoping that we get more Usopp development, but I think Oda purposely gave Usopp less shine in Wano, kind of to set him up on a low point entering Elbaf, where he's gonna get a ton of development, especially with the potential of the red hair pirates also being in Elbaf. We know that arc is gonna be a massive arc for Usopp. When he ends up reuniting with his dad, his hero, who only kind of knows him by the bounty posters, so like he might view Usopp very highly as this god with a very high bounty. But if Usopp goes into that arc all of a sudden with the lowest bounty out of the Straw Hats and not really accomplishing much, like remember his pop greens couldn't even tickle page 1, that must be pretty demoralizing. So at this point, I'm kind of just locking into this headcanon of this Usopp development arc that we're gonna get in Elbaf. So as far as his bounty goes, I'm not expecting a big jump at all. I think at most it maybe jumps to 300 million, but I would not count out the idea that it does not jump at all. With that said though, let's get to our final Straw Hat, and that is Chopper. And with Chopper, there's two clear options. Either he stays as a gag, as a pet, and his bounty goes to 150 berries, or this could be finally the moment that Chopper gets taken seriously and gets a real bounty. And I actually do think there is a real chance of that happening, specifically because the moment where he slapped up Queen, a Yonko commander, first off, that's a pretty big moment. But as he did that in monster form, he yelled at everybody that he is not a Tanuki, so maybe that's kind of like the defining moment, and word kind of spreads like he's actually a beast and he's not just a pet. Especially this time around, he was in monster point for like 30 whole minutes, so like there was a lot of time for people to really see him in that terrifying strong form. So honestly, I think it's about damn time that Chopper gets recognized. I'm gonna say he actually gets a real bounty this time around. I still don't think it's gonna be crazy high, so I'm gonna go with a bounty of 200 to 300 million. So that right there is my predictions for all the Straw Hats, but of course you guys know the drill. I gotta include Yamato in here as well. Yamato for Straw Hat forever. I've been on it since the beginning. I'm not getting off of this train. But even if she doesn't end up joining the Straw Hats, I do expect that she will be getting a bounty after Wano. At the end of the day, whether she ends up being a Straw Hat or not, I still expect her to become a pirate and to go explore. Maybe she ends up taking over the Beast Pirates because we still don't know what happened to them. Now throughout Wano, Yamato has obviously shown that she's incredibly strong. Advanced Conquerors Haki, Mythical Zoan, Kaido's son, daughter, as well that's going to be playing a factor. So realistically, I would not be surprised if she gets a crazy bounty of like over 1 billion. And if she doesn't end up joining the Straw Hats and ends up leading like the Beast Pirates, I fully expect her bounty will be over 1 billion. But like I said, I'm sticking with Yamato for Straw Hat, and I just can't see her surpassing Sanji or Zoro in terms of bounty. So as a Straw Hat, I think she'll still have a really high bounty of 700 to 800 million. I think it'd be really cool if that was like Odin's old bounty, or like if it's much higher, Yamato eventually gets to that. I also like the idea of her getting Ace's former bounty of 550 million. That would be a dope connection. But honestly, with how strong she is and her reputation, that just feels slightly too low. So out of all the Straw Hats, this is easily the one I'm most uncertain of, so I'm just gonna lock in 700 to 800 million. With that said though, let's talk about the non-Straw Hats that also put in work during the Wano arc, and this is gonna tie right into the conversation of who are the new Yonko. And as I said in my chapter review, I think the best and most obvious choices here are Law and Kid, who defeated another Yonko in Big Mom, which is still kind of crazy to think about. I feel like a lot of us haven't fully processed that they actually did that. We have to recognize, give a round of applause to Kid and Law. They defeated Big Mom, and because of that, I think most likely they are going to be two of the new Emperors of the Sea. And as far as their bounty goes, I actually think this might be a pretty easy one. I think it's going to be around 2.1 to 2.2 billion. Now, some of you might disagree and say that's too high, like they can't be higher than Zoro and Sanji, but like once again, they defeated Big Mom. And on the other hand, I'm sure some of you are going to say, hey, that's way too low. Luffy's going to go all the way up to like 5 billion and they're only at 2.2, 2.1. But at the end of the day, they did defeat Big Mom as a pair, where Luffy did solo Kaido for the most part. I also think Luffy is obviously going to be viewed as the leader of this entire alliance, so he's going to get a lot of credit. But yeah, as far as Law and Kid's bounty goes, I think it makes sense in multiple ways. First off, if they are new Yonko, their bounty being close to Blackbeard, who's currently at like 2.22, it makes a lot of sense. And then another part of it that makes sense to me is that Big Mom had a bounty of 4.3 billion. So if you split that number in half, it's 2.15 billion, which is right around Blackbeard. I feel like that's just a perfect number for Law and Kid. I know that's a very simple mathematical approach, but I feel like it just makes a lot of sense. And also both of them being announced as the Emperors with over a 2 billion bounty each, that's gonna be hype. But that being said though, I could absolutely be wrong on their bounties, and maybe they are not the new Yonko that are announced, which if that ends up being the case, I could see him getting a bounty of just over 1 billion, closer to Zoro and Sanji. Because as far as the new Emperors go, there are other candidates that we have to address, and that is the Shichibukai. It's something at this point that we've kind of almost forgotten about because it's been so long since we've last heard about that news. But at this point, the raid is over, 7 days have passed, so the whole Warlords capturing thing might be already sorted. So I fully expect their bounties to be revealed soon. We were kind of teased about it all the way back when we got that massive chapter in 957. So we'll definitely be getting Warlord bounties soon as well, whether they're like old or updated. And I think it's completely possible that one or two of them put in a lot of work and maybe they end up taking over the mantle of an Emperor instead of Law and Kid, who could be viewed as like Luffy's alliance and underlings. That could be a pretty interesting twist because I think most people are expecting Law and Kid to be new Emperors at this point. Some people have brought up the idea that Yamato and Katakuri could be the new Emperors as like the heirs to Big Mom and Kaido. But Yamato's pretty new and like Whole Cake Island's literally being invaded right now, so like I just don't think it makes a ton of sense for it to be them. So if there's gonna be a twist on who these new Emperors are gonna be, I think the Warlords are the best option. And honestly, out of all the Warlords, the one I think is the most likely might just be Buggy. I know that might be taking the gag too far, but Oda has done that throughout the story. A lot of people thought Buggy becoming a Warlord was a little too far, but that man is an absolute legend and he might somehow just end up defeating the Marines, and he has the manpower and influence to become a Yonko. So honestly, I'm just gonna say screw it. Let's just say that Buggy is gonna end up as an Emperor. I think his bounty might be over 2 billion. Realistically, it's probably gonna be 200 million, but hashtag trust in Buggy. Besides Buggy though, I do expect the other Warlords to have massive bounties and have a chance at becoming an Emperor as well. Of course, the person I think is the strongest out of the Warlords is Mihawk. He's a person I consider in my Elite 12, which is once you step into that territory, you don't think you're gonna lose against anybody. So honestly, based off of power alone, I think he should be over 1 billion. The only thing that holds me back from giving him a much higher one is because he does ride solo. He has no crew or influence. He doesn't really have any massive goals besides being a strongest swordsman. But on the other hand, once I started to think about it more, we do still have people like Marco, who at this point is pretty much retired and still has a 1.3 billion bounty. So honestly, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that he has a bounty of at least 2 billion, and that might still be underselling him. Next up though, let's talk about Weevil, who I think is probably the second strongest current Warlord. I'm still incredibly intrigued on how his weird plot line with the Whitebeard pirates is gonna tie into like the main storyline. Maybe we do end up getting a mini Sphinx Island arc with Marco after Wano. I do think Marco should have a bigger purpose with his role in Wano, so that could tie into Weevil. But as far as Weevil's bounty goes, his first bounty was 480 million. He right away became a warlord, so off rip, he's already a monster. And if he ends up just brutally destroying the Marines, I suspect that his bounty might jump to like 800, 900 million. I'm not gonna go all the way up to 1 billion because we just don't know enough about Weevil to make that massive leap. So I think 800 million is a reasonable guess, but at the same time, I will say I'm not gonna completely count out the idea that Weevil is actually just gonna be used as a plot device. Like this whole being Whitebeard's son plotline just kind of gets tossed to the side, and instead he just gets decked and destroyed by the SSG. That's probably not what a lot of people want to hear, but we've seen Oda take storylines and kind of just minimize them and use it in another minor way, and Weevil might just end up being a sacrificial lamb to show how strong the SSG is. Of course, I still hope we get to see more of him and more of his storyline, so I'm gonna lock in 800 million for now. But moving on to the last warlord, we have Boa Hancock, because Kuma is still a slave at this point, if he's even still alive. But yeah, as far as Hancock goes, the last bounty we know about her is only 80 million, but she got that frozen when she was like 18, so I do think her current bounty is gonna be a lot higher. I think the last time I made a bounty prediction about her, I went kind of crazy and said like 1 billion. I think my expectations have been reined in a little bit after finding out the bounties of the Tobiropo and the commanders and Marco. So I think as far as Hancock goes, I think 500 million around the Tobiropo level could be fair. All of a sudden, I'm starting to feel like that's too low, so maybe I go like kind of in the middle of like 700 million. But honestly, as far as Hancock goes, I'm more worried about her character because I think there might be a good chance she actually ends up getting captured. But guys, that's gonna do it for my bounty and emperor predictions. If I missed anybody else, let me know in the comments. I'll talk about them in the comments. Definitely let me know your predictions as well. And also in my hand, I have a One Piece volume between 75 and 80. If you guess it wrong, you have to like, subscribe, and watch the next video. And the answer is 79.